The BBC was remarkably different today, with its coverage on Gaza when it cut live to broadcast the proceedings from the United Nations Security Council. Since I have criticized the BBC on countless occasions when it failed to adhere to its own editorial guidelines, it is only right that I also highlight when it honors the profession of journalism. I don't know if this had to do with the presenter, Christian Fraser, my former colleague, or it is a case of my former employer trying to redeem itself after shaming journalism for over 19 months. I first noticed the BBC broadcast of the live speech of Israeli propagandist Danny Denon from United Nations Security Council when I took my daughter to a nearby stadium for athletics training. I quickly checked if the BBC had also broadcast the speech by the Palestinian representative live. And to my pleasant surprise, not only had the BBC broadcast the Palestinian ambassador's speech live, but the presenter was also quick to sum up Riyad Mansour's emotional and powerful speech. I'm going to play that clip for you. Please pay attention to how Christian Fraser presents a summary after Mansour concludes his speech.
He shouts, "Are we afraid of the world?" The crowd answered, "No, we are not afraid." Are we settling the land of Israel? Are we liberating Gaza? The crowd cheered. Netanyahu said the objective of this destruction Netanyahu said that the objective of this distribution mechanism was to have a sterile zone in the south of Gaza where the entire population can move. Save the two-state solution, save peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, the Palestinian ambassador at one stage thumping the desk, crying, saying it was unbearable, the killing of children with bombs and starvation. Nothing can justify attacking civilians. He said Palestinian or Israelis, no double standards. And then pointing at all those representatives there in the Security Council saying, act in your national capacity. So let's hear a little more from what is happening on the floor.
Respond to some of the comments that we just heard, and to say that Israel does have the right to defend itself and has taken numerous measures to limit harm to civilians and address humanitarian needs. And while the loss of civilian life in Gaza is tragic, the responsibility for this rests with Hamas, which could stop the fighting today by freeing the hostages, and agreeing to the ceasefire terms already accepted by Israel. Thank you, sir.
The Israeli propagandist was back to his old theatrics as he called the United Nations a mafia and cast aspersions on the UN aid chief Tom Fletcher for raising the plight of Palestinians.
The blood of Yaron and Sarah is not only on the shooter's hands. It is on every official, every influencer, every academic, every anti-Semite, every so-called expert who has spent the last 19 months portraying Israel as a genocidal regime. But we cannot talk about such recklessness without talking about Mr. Tom Fletcher, who sat here a few weeks ago. Mr. Fletcher has assumed the role of moral preacher. His speeches and statements drip with pomposity and self-righteousness, but not a shred of responsibility. Mr. Fletcher, when you engage in blood libels, do not act surprised when blood is spilled in the streets. This is what happens when anti-Semitic propaganda is filtered through the language of human rights. That is what happens when terms like genocide are thrown around like political weapons.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Israel for his statement, and now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Well, we've had a dramatic couple of hours at the Security Council. We are watching live pictures from New York. In the last hour or so, we've heard from Sigrid Kaag, the Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace, about the need to allow the UN back into Gaza. We've also heard from a surgeon who carried out emergency procedures in Gaza about the attacks on the hospitals. And then just now from Danny Danon, the Israeli representative who complains, quotes, that the international focus is fixed on Israel and not on the terrorists. Let's bring in Neda Tawfik, who's been watching throughout, and some quite emotional scenes, particularly when we heard from the Palestinian representative, Neda.
Yeah, that's right. He actually started tearing up and kind of banging on the table in emotion. Palestinian ambassador, saying that Palestinian lives are just as equal as anyone else, and urging the Security Council. He said, if not the Council, then even nations themselves individually to take action to protect civilians. Christian, he spoke about, for example, some of the civilian stories we've heard about. The Algerian ambassador had actually held up a picture of one of the doctors who lost her 9 children. The Palestinian ambassador also spoke of that viral moment of the young girl walking through the flames. It had been a school that became a shelter that was fired on by an Israeli strike. So the Palestinian ambassador getting quite emotional, talking about those instances and saying how even he, as a grandfather, you can't bear how unbearable it is to lose loved ones, and Palestinians going through this every day. And him saying that, the world can't just sit by and watch this happening, and saying directly that he believes Netanyahu is doing this for his political survival, and condemning some of the statements that have come from Israeli officials, which he called genocidal statements. He, in his remarks, accused Israel of ethnic cleansing, of genocide. But a very different tone, of course, from the Israeli ambassador when he got his chance to speak to the council.
Christian then spoke to Ehud Olmert, a former Israeli prime minister, who launched a blistering attack on Netanyahu and his terrorist cabinet colleagues. Much to my surprise, Olmert was using exactly the same terminology that I have been using on this channel during this conflict. In response to a question from the BBC presenter, he blamed Netanyahu and his ministers for the genocide in Gaza, but more importantly, he referred to them as a bunch of thugs. Exactly the word that he used, bunch of thugs. And there was no pushback from the BBC saying that Israel would deny this. I didn't expect, nobody expected BBC presenters to take a side with Palestinians, but at least do not disgrace the profession by deliberately protecting a genocidal maniac. There was absolutely no need for some of BBC presenters to use this despicable and disgusting line that Israel would deny this. You don't use that line when you are covering Russia-Ukraine war. And we know who these presenters are. And BBC turned a blind eye. BBC bosses should have come down on them like a ton of bricks. They didn't do that. This is why I found today's broadcast quite refreshing.
There is no doubt that the criticism is getting louder among Israel's closest allies. The EU top diplomat today, Kaja Kallas, said the Israeli strikes on Gaza go beyond what she believes is necessary to fight Hamas. Her comments add to the growing criticism of the Israeli government. The UK has now suspended trade talks with Israel. The German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, says he no longer understands Israel's objectives. But the way in which the civilian population has been affected, he added, can no longer be justified by a fight against Hamas terrorism. The EU is one of the largest donors of humanitarian aid to Gaza, but most of that aid, said Kaja Kallas, does not reach the Palestinians. Let's bring in the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, who's been waiting patiently for us. Thank you very much. While we were just hearing from Danny Danon at the UN. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, said today that Israeli strikes in Gaza go beyond what is necessary to fight Hamas. Do you agree with her?
Yes. This is not just my personal opinion. I believe the majority of the Israelis, a wide range of different Israeli groups, including all of the major generals of the Israeli army, the Mossad, the Secret Service, commanders, all wrote a petition to the Prime Minister asking to end the war immediately because there is not any chance to achieve something which is worth the cost of expanding the war and the military operations in Gaza. The war is widely accepted to be an illegitimate war waged at this point by the State of Israel, by the government of the State of Israel. And when illegitimate war is waged, and when there is not any objective that is worth the cost, when we are likely to lose the hostages at a time when there is a genuine chance to achieve an agreement that will bring them back, when Israeli soldiers are killed as a result of an illegitimate operation, and when thousands of Palestinians, uninvolved Palestinians, are killed, this is a war crime, and we are against it.
Who is guilty of the war crime?
I say the government of Israel.
The Prime Minister?
Prime Minister and a bunch of thugs that are now known as the Israeli cabinet, with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and all the other messianic extremist fundamentalists that want to clean Gaza so that it will be ready for resettling of Israeli settlements as part of a comprehensive move to perhaps expel also the Palestinians from the West Bank so that it could be integrated completely into the State of Israel.
I don't know if the recent change in attitude by the BBC has been due to the fear of future prosecution at The Hague, or the corporation has finally realized its grave sins and is keen to redeem itself. The other day, when I highlighted a questionable broadcast by BBC's Radio 5 Live on Gaza, the flagship BBC radio station was quick to do another 1-hour show with a completely different take. And it was right on the next day. BBC 5 Live I have never seen doing back-to-back talk show or debate show on the same topic. And this time, presenter Nikki Campbell was more sensitive and fair. What's more, he reached out to me on Twitter to share the link of that program so that I could listen to that show and do another video on it. And Nikki and I, we don't follow each other on Twitter. So that's why it was surprising. Look, I don't have anything personal against BBC. I do not have any personal animosity. This organization gave me a lot during my 12 years association, and I have plenty of fond memories. But equally, I would be dishonest to my journalistic ethos if I do not highlight the questionable conduct of the organization in the face of a Holocaust, which is unfolding right before our eyes. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.